Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Actual Play Broadcast. Today we are doing another episode of Player Portfolio. This time we'll specifically be going over mechanically building out a character for those who are inclined to either have a good grasp of what they need to worry about mechanic-wise with their character, or who want to get a better understanding of why mechanics are important when building a character. I
I'm
am
Zemian.
joined.
I'm also here.
Yeah, I was about to say I'm joined by my co-host.
Yeah. Zemian, the one, the only, the Glorbus Bingus
Glorbus
of all
Bingus.
time.
But I think the first thing that we want to do when talking about mechanics is try to detail out what we mean by mechanics. We're not necessarily talking about, 1 + 1 = 2 when you roll the dice. It's a bit more abstract than that.
Yeah, this is something for character creation that kind of everybody, when they want to talk about making characters, they really prefer to just talk about backstory and such, which is understandable because it is hard to talk about mechanically building a character in a very system agnostic way. Because different systems will derive different methodologies, different preferences, techniques, methodologies, etc., that are more suited to their game. For example, building a character in Traveler is not really comparable to, say, building a World of Darkness character.
No.
So,
or building a Harn character for those who want to go listen to
yeah,
our archaeology.
yeah, there are definitive differences. So we kind of want to have this conversation because there are definitely misconceptions in the community and also misconceptions that can arise with people who are new to tabletop RPGs. Mechanics don't need to inherently be something to be afraid of, but also there are fallacies that develop in some circles, more specifically the Stormwind Fallacy, but we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, on its own.
Yeah. But first we want to hit on, why are mechanics important? Well, we know mechanics are the rules by which the game operates. And your characters have stats, statistics, attributes, characteristics, abilities, skills, powers, spells, whatever the terminology, the vocabulary it might be that you use to define the rules by which your character operates. Your character does at some level have to engage with the system. So that alone means the mechanics are going to matter. What numbers or values or keywords or whatever you assign to your character are a decision on your part on how you are going to engage with the game, which does sound higher concept than what it really is.
Yeah.
But it is true.
And another way to break it down is what we want you to keep in mind when making a character, like, based on the mechanics, is if you say, I'm going to make a ranger and they're going to be an archer. Cool. Mechanically speaking, you want to get some sort of ranged weapon, like a bow. If you go to the table, say, I'm going to make an archer, and then buy melee weapons and don't buy a bow, you're not fulfilling the concept that you started out with.
Yeah.
And keeping in mind those mechanics with that concept is what's kind of important, because that means you're going to have to track certain things. Like if you go, oh, well, I want a character that's good at range. You're going to want a range weapon. And you're going to want to, likely, depending on the system, focus in whatever stat allows you to hit things. Whether stat or attribute needs to go up for that. That's mechanically focused. There are some, and we'll get into this later, there are some people who believe that you should, not fully invest in a mechanic for your character concept. So instead of maxing out your thing to hit for your archer character, you put a little bit in there. But then you max out a different stat. And like, you can do that, but whether or not you should or should not is a different question, and that's for later. But mechanics are just how your character interacts with the system. How it interacts with the system, not with the players, not necessarily with the GM in a direct stance, and not necessarily how you interact with your own character. It's how the character interacts with the game. Because this is a game. It's a role-playing game. So there's a lot of give and take from the role-playing part and the game part.
Yeah.
So with that preamble in mind, mechanics for a character are important with concept. Like I said earlier, if you go and say, I'm going to make an archer of some sort, and you don't get a bow or something that allows you to attack at range, what are you doing? Like, you got all these skills and all these abilities that sit there and help with range combat, but then you don't grab a bow. That's kind of what it feels like to me, in my opinion, that if you invest into a concept and then don't follow through mechanically, you kind of just, tripping over yourself.
I think a more potent example could be saying you want to play a wizard, but not putting any points in the attributes you use to cast. So mechanically, your character is actually shit at being a wizard because you did not invest in the things that make you wizard better, which is problematic, especially in systems that are more specialist based, which most systems that have magic in them generally are
Yeah.
specialist in some way, shape, or form. So if the party is hearing, oh, you're going to play a wizard, okay, they have an idea of what that means. But then you come to the table and they're like, wizard, do the wizard thing. And your wizard is like, well, I'll give it a go. And you cast, I don't know, fireball. Using D&D as an example, you cast fireball, but because your casting stat is low, the DC to save against it is actually significantly easier than it would normally be. And then suddenly enemies are dodging out of the fireball, only taking half damage, and the rest of the party is like, why is your DC that low? They don't need to be min-maxers to pick up on that. The math in 5e is pretty straightforward. So, why is your stat that low? Oh, well, I didn't put any points in my intelligence. What?
You will look like a goober.
Yeah.
And it's important to have mechanics that are able to back up your character, because if you have a concept of, I want to do X, and then you purposely go out of your way to make yourself not good at X, I question why you're playing. If you were at my table, I'd question why you were playing that concept.
Yeah,
Because
specifically crippling your ability to operate within whatever it is your specialization is. It's technically a choice you can make, but You probably shouldn't, unless, because I'm gonna try to avoid making sweeping blanket statements, because there's always that particular situation that exists outside the norm.
Yeah.
99% of the time, it's not something you should do. There is a niche case where there are people who know what they're doing and they're doing it under a very specific situation in which it is likely not a forever thing. And it's not necessarily going to be we're going to be dealing with this for 2 years type thing. This is a story element that's going to get addressed in some way, hopefully relatively soon. But general rule of thumb, do not do this. Do not push for this. Make a character who is going to be good at the thing you actually are intending for them to be good at.
And
If you want to play, I don't know, a fighter who is
yeah.
trying to learn magic but is really bad at it, you don't take levels in wizard to do that. You take levels in fighter and you take the magic initiate feat and get a couple cantrips.
Or get the level 3 and get Arcane Knight or whatever the fuck it's called.
Yeah, and you role play them struggling with the magic. You
And
don't nerf your character to do this.
what I would go a step further is to say, if you don't want, like, if you're that wizard and you're like, well, I have like a 16 and an 18, you don't have to make intelligence the 18. Whether or not you should is a different question based on like what you're trying to do with your character. But if you want them as just like, I want them to be like a former rogue who got into magic late in life, quote unquote late in life, changes depending on what fantasy race you are. And they, they're getting better and better at magic, but they picked it up later, and this is relatively new to them. Then them having an 18 in Dex, which is still a good stat to have because it avoids you getting punched in the face, and a 16 in Intelligence is fine. You don't have to make it your highest stat. Don't go out of your way and make it your lowest. That's where I would typically draw the line at the table. I'm like, okay, so why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Who hurt you?
Yeah.
And
all this is to go ahead.
Part of this is not only to be like, hey, this could hamper your fun, but it could most certainly hamper other people's fun at the table. For example,
I have an example for that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. So now part of this was how the player was engaging with the game, but the player also didn't make great decisions when they were making their character. I was playing a Shadowrun 5th edition game. This was years ago, back when I actually got to play. And for the first time ever, I was not playing the Decker, which was a mistake. But I was not playing the Decker because I wanted to actually try playing a mage for once. Other players said, hey, I'm going to play the Decker. For those that don't know, the Decker is the hacker in Shadowrun. They've got some really cool technology. They can hack super fast. It's movie hacking. It is not real world hacking where it takes hours, days, potentially months to get into a system. It's within turns, you're doing crazy shit. This guy he had bad rolls, for one. He did not really invest in the skills and the attributes that he needed to be good at this thing. And Shadowrun, if you do not know, is a very specialist-minded game. It is a cyberpunk fantasy heist game, essentially. If you've ever seen a heist movie, you understand it is a crew of specialists with very specific skills coming together to form a cohesive team to do the heist. Shadowrun is built on that same idea. It is a team of people of very specific skills. Your team has typically a Decker, a street samurai, a mage, so on and so forth. You don't have tons of overlap in Shadowrun typically. So he was our decker, period. End of story. Didn't have good dice rolls, and the player also was not bothering to pay attention to any of the mechanics. Didn't bother learning any of the rules for his role. And it led to the most painful 8 sessions of Shadowrun I have ever played. Because, sure, I understand he was new to the system, and I was very familiar with the role he was playing, but I was willing to give leeway and offered multiple times, hey, I can help you understand this stuff. And then I spent every session re-explaining basic things to him. And then just, honestly, his constant refusal to actually do Decker things, rework his character, even though the GM was willing to allow him to adjust his stats and stuff now that he knew what he needed. It was just a total refusal to actually engage at a mechanical level with the game, and also at a roleplay level, really, because it got to the point where basic things he was supposed to be doing as a decker, I was literally in front of him outsourcing it to NPCs because I knew he wasn't going to do it.
I think I know who this person is.
Potentially.
And you know, I don't know if that's necessarily like an extreme example, because that is just kind of what can happen. Because, like we said, these are generally specialist games where you have a specific function that you're supposed to meet, and it can hamper other people's ability to enjoy the game. And I'm not speaking to a level of like, oh, I'm so frustrated I can't play because you're floundering and it's pissing me off. There are just some functions that, if you said that you were going to handle by saying, oh, I'm going to play this, and then proceed to not handle it well, and the rest of the group was counting on you to do that, you're affecting everyone else at the table. Because now they either have to, well, you're not going to be able to do X, so now we need to plan around that, or we have to accept the consequences of you not being able to do X. And, there's a level of interest that can appear from doing that, but it's overshadowed by the level of frustration that I typically see from players. Having GM'd for various groups.
I do have one other example that is definitely more explicitly about not paying attention to mechanics and character creation.
Okay.
Scion First Edition.
Oh,
you
God.
Definitely know this person.
I think I'm confident I do.
Yeah. Scion, most RPGs are specialist games to some degree. Just because your character is your character, you want to customize it, you want to have abilities that other people can't steal the spotlight from you on. So most games operate under that lens. Scion definitely goes hard into the specialist lens just by the nature of what it is, because you're working to become a god. And it's very much a pantheon god of specific things. This player initially didn't even want to participate in this game. We said, okay, fine, you don't have to. And then suddenly, like a week later, they wanted to participate. And they made a character on their own. They are normally somebody who reads the rules and such. But they read the rules and everything, and we came together to do a sort of session 0/session 1, where we were going to do a little bit of a trial combat, as well as some other basic stuff just between our characters to get a feel for the rules and how they handle, and we were fluffing up as the characters were sparring within the fiction of the world. This player very much spread out their abilities. across a lot of different things. Which, Scion characters are very powerful. Compared to a mundane person, they were very powerful, even though they're very spread out. But because they weren't a specialist, when they tried to participate in this trial combat, they literally couldn't do anything of substance. They were so spread out, they could not hit a certain player, they could not harm that certain player. They generally couldn't hit my character or harm my character. Granted, none of the participating players could have hurt my character because I went super tank, which was fun. That's not the point, though. This player proceeded to, shall we say, get salty and turn the experience rather sour very fast. Because what came next was them suddenly flipping through the book, desperately trying to find a way to rules lawyer to win. Instead of acknowledging they did not understand how specialist this game really was. Which then, of course, domino affected into souring everybody else's experience, and yeah. We can always chalk this up to this is a player issue rather than a character creation issue, but I think there is a bit of a kernel of, hey, if they had understood the system, this situation wouldn't have happened. Because if they had understood the nature of the system, they probably would not have necessarily made those choices.
And if I am correct, which I'm confident that I am, the individual that's also being referred to is an advocate of they push for making a character mechanically less capable to make a character more roleplay attractive. Which leads us to our next topic.
That must be a pretty new, well, I don't know how new, but last I talked to them, they were not in that camp. Now I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Which leads to our next topic, the Stormwind Fallacy.
Yeah, we absolutely have to talk about this because it's just in the nature of creating characters. This is something a lot of people end up brushing up against at one point or another if they start playing tabletop RPGs a lot, whether they realize it or not, whether they even hear the name or not. There was a user, they did regret naming it after their own username, but it was by a user named Tempest Stormwind, but after having a ton of discussions, decided to give a name to this fallacy so that people would bring it up more often, because it's easier to attach a name to something rather than go through the elaborate explanation every time. It's easier to say, this fallacy, oh, you don't know what it is, go look it up. Or here's a link to the wall of text explaining this.
Yeah.
The Stormwind Fallacy is intended to address what is a version of the false dilemma fallacy, which I'm not going to get into false dilemma and stuff. If you know false dilemma, you'll already kind of pick up the idea that's going to be expressed here, but I'm just going to talk about this purely in the Stormwind Fallacy sense. But there is a group of people out there who believe if you want to roleplay, you cannot min-max. And thusly, if you min-max, you cannot roleplay. Which is expressly false. This is a fallacy. This is objectively incorrect. If you're of that opinion and you're listening to this, like, I'm sorry, this isn't a debate. This isn't something that can be argued about. This isn't a matter of opinion. You can min-max and role-play the best character your group has ever seen role-played ever. These things are not mutually exclusive. There is no barrier here.
And the idea that there's a barrier, I feel, is odd, because there most certainly just is not. If you
Well,
want evidence of where that is not true, the Stormwind Fallacy, like, it's a fallacy and you can see proof of it, I can give you 3 names from a very popular tabletop RPG group that, for the most part, knows what they're doing and are great with the characters they make in a roleplay perspective and can handle them very mechanically well.
yeah.
And it's just about anything Taliesin Jaffe makes.
Even though his dice
Liam,
hate him.
even though his dice absolutely fucking hate him. Liam O'Brien and Travis Willingham.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is this fallacy is a side effect of people's experience with certain types of players.
Yeah.
And I can't fault people for walking away and having these negative ideas because of bad experiences. It's just how our brains are wired. It's how we process information. If X, then Y. 1 + 1 still equals 2. But there is a threshold of you have to hit a point where you acknowledge it's not that roleplay and min-maxing can't mix. It's a player behavior problem.
Yeah.
It's not the nature of the game. It's just the nature of the player.
Yeah, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit in a previous episode. Gonna dig into it a little bit more here because we're actually talking about it with intent. Part of this comes from a verbiage issue and people not acknowledging the player issue. A lot of people take min-maxing with a very negative lens. They have a very negative perspective on the term min-maxing. There are those who acknowledge min-maxing is not an inherently negative thing, because it's not. We've talked about it before, where min-maxing generally means minimizing in certain areas so that you can maximize in others. It's not about making an overpowered character or trying to win the game. It is about getting the most out of certain areas for your character and minimizing in other areas to be able to do that. For example, if you are a wizard in a D&D 5e game, taking the option to reduce your strength below the standard to get it to the minimum starting value so that you have more points to increase, say, your intelligence. Because as a wizard, you're not going to be punching people. The difference between a +0 and a -1 for a wizard when it comes to their strength is overall minimal and gives you a little bit more gas in your tank for doing the thing you care about, which is casting spells.
Yeah.
That is min-maxing at its core. This is not an inherently bad thing. The problem players that people confuse for min-maxing and people who do min-max are what some would call power gamers or munchkins, to use a older term.
It's a card game. Look it up. It's actually kind of fun to play. It's really silly.
Yeah. Power gamers or munchkins. I'm going to stick to power gamers because that's the term I use most often.
Yeah.
Are people who are trying to milk the system for every advantage they can possibly get regardless of whether or not it is in good faith of the game. There is a difference between somebody getting as many advantages as they can on an attack roll so that they can succeed and do a lot of damage, and somebody who is trying to take advantage of, some people would call this rules lawyering, but people trying to take advantage of aspects of the rules or deficiencies in the rules or technicalities in the rule to milk every tiny advantage to swing literally anything in their favor, regardless how small, in the effort to essentially win the game. And we could have a whole conversation about how winning the game is not the goal of a tabletop RPG, not in reality. We can talk about winning encounters and everything, but D&D and other tabletop RPGs are not games in the sense that there is a definitive beat everybody else at the table so that you are in first place when it is over. That's not how these games work. That's not what they're about. But for power gamers, that's what they make it about. They want the spotlight all the time. They want to do nothing but succeed. They do not want to fail at any costs. They will engage with the system in the least faithful ways possible to ensure their victory. These are power gamers. These are munchkins.
These are a pain in my ass.
Yes. These are problem players. This is a player problem. If you have somebody who is min-maxing and they are being a dick, that is a player problem, not a min-maxer problem. If you have somebody min-maxing and they're really bad at roleplay, that is a min-maxer who is bad at roleplay. They're just not good at roleplay. If you have a min-maxer who is not engaging with roleplay, once again, they're not a good role player. But you can have a min-maxer who is really good at roleplay. You can also have somebody who's really good at roleplay, but really good at min-maxing. You can also have, more common than you may think, somebody who is bad at min-maxing and bad at role-playing.
Yeah.
Because these things are not inherently linked. Is there a bit of a bell curve here in that well, I shouldn't say a bell curve, but is there a correlation between min-maxers and people that do not roleplay well? Yes. But correlation does not equal causation. There's something to be said that more mechanically minded people are sometimes more likely to struggle with the abstract in regards to roleplay. Because let's face it, the tabletop RPG community does attract a lot of neurodivergent individuals. That's not to say every min-maxer is neurodivergent and blah, blah, blah. Not saying that. But this is the reason why the correlation exists. That doesn't mean it's the cause. But historically speaking, these games have attracted people who click with mechanics very easily, but struggle with the story aspects, especially improv. Because mechanics, especially for a lot of these older systems, are very concrete, very strict, reliable, consistent things. And people who vibe very strongly with these things are not always good at abstract improvisational thinking because it is variable, it is not consistent, it is on the fly. There's not a formula to it. not at least in a way that they understand. And the reverse can be said as well. There are a lot of role players who do not handle mechanics very well because their brain just isn't wired that way. Neither of these things are bad. These are just things we have to acknowledge, especially if you're in a group with people who have these differences. But to imply that because somebody min maxes means they cannot roleplay is entirely incorrect. I get told people like my roleplay, and I min max. I don't always min max super hard. I often still do make mechanical decisions based off of character choices and character backstory and stuff. But in general, I do make very mechanically adept character sheets for my characters to represent their strong points, but also their weak points.
And one of the things to kind of keep in mind is we're not, with what was described earlier, we're not immediately calling like, oh, power gaming is bad. I don't want to put it that way. I don't want it to seem like we're coming off that way. Power gaming has its own problems attached to it that are harder to solve. Because if you have one person at the table who's power gaming and everyone else isn't, you run into a situation where that person probably isn't going to be mechanically interested in playing the game as much, or they're so invested in the mechanical part of the aspect of the game, they're going to try to sit there and make sure that their star is the only one shining. But
I mean, like, if you're gonna have a power gamer at the table, the entire table should probably be power gamers
yeah,
because it's a play style, or rather a way of approaching the game that does not work well with non-power gamers. Because what the power gamer wants out of the game, 99% of the time, is not going to match up what other types of players want out of the game. Whereas somebody who min maxes is not inherently juxtaposed to what everybody else at the table wants. They just have different priorities when they're making a character compared to somebody who doesn't care about min maxing, as an example.
and these have, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to better understand a game mechanically. If the idea of, well, I want to know how I can mechanically squeeze the most out of this lemon that is this game, that's fine. That is, people who make builds and things like that. If you look online, you'll find probably tons of them. You want to do this, this, and this because, like, mathematically we have solved this game that way you get this much out of doing this. There are plenty of people who do that, and there are some groups who enjoy doing that, and like everyone does something of that flavor where it's like, I'm trying to milk the most out of this. And if you want to do that, you can always do like the theory crafting, but when you take it to a table, that's when it gets more complicated.
Yeah, I
For
mean,
example, if you don't know if what you're doing is power gaming, make sure to run like what you're doing by the GM and like be explicit in what your purpose is. So it's like, hey, I want to test something. I want to see if this is, you know, very mechanically viable. And then, if they say, no, I'm not looking to run that kind of game, then you should respect that. If they're like,
yeah,
sure, try it, just make sure you have a backstory and even in, a role play perspective, interesting character to justify all these options that you're making to
yeah.
squeeze this orange or lemon.
I've literally stopped playing Pathfinder with a GM because they would not stop letting power gamers in their game. I had played multiple attempts at campaigns with this GM, and every time they would bring in some friends they know who love Pathfinder, but are power gamers. They abuse the rules to get as much mathematical bonuses because they theory craft builds. So they design these characters to milk the system for everything it's got. And this GM was also lenient. So they would get away with a lot. And they brought a character who, out of the box, was bringing crazy numbers compared to everybody else. Everything they did was within the bounds of the rules, but they were really abusing size modifiers, reach, attacks of opportunity, so on and so forth. It was a mixture of things, but it literally got to the point, mind you, this is a martial character. I'm playing a barbarian, and we're in our third combat of the game, and it's at this point I'm fucking fed up because I've gotten to hit an enemy twice in the course of 3 combats of a Pathfinder game as a barbarian. Because this character was so overtuned, they were solving combats by themselves. Now, could we sit back and say the GM should have stopped a lot of things? The GM could have done more for the combats? Of course. There's a lot of variables that go into these situations. But the reality is that this character had the ability to come in there and essentially overshadow the rest of the group by themselves in any combat situation, essentially. Yeah. Extremely frustrating experience.
Here's my question.
Dropped that game very quickly. Told GM, not doing this. GM offered another Pathfinder game some months later. I'm like, no power gamers. Not again. What do you do? He invited power gamers. Near immediately dropped that game. He said, oh, they're not going to be as bad. They were just as bad.
Were they good at roleplay?
I'm going to have to say no, not really, because I don't even remember anything about their character other than the fact that they were extremely obnoxious in regards to just being insanely overpowered. It wasn't that they were bad at roleplay. It was just, it practically wasn't existent from their end of the table. And the other time I did encounter a power gamer in that GM's games, they were actually really bad at roleplay because they were playing this very snowflakey concept that very much felt like, oh, look at me, I'm so special. Look at me, look at me, look at me. And would constantly interrupt other people on top of that. It was very much somebody lacking in, shall we say, an understanding of social dynamics.
And, you know, part of what we're doing in explaining like the fallacy and giving all these examples of, you know, what we recommend that you actually keep an eye out for is these are broad strokes. If everyone at your table is a power gamer and that's how you all like to play, you're all on the same page. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, if everybody's having fun, all's fair in love and war. You know, do what gets rocks off as long as everybody's having fun.
Yeah, as long as everyone consents to you getting your rocks off.
Yeah.
And there's a portion of it where I would recommend, if you feel like someone is playing a bit power gamey, it's that, you know, situation where you talk to the person or the GM if, you don't want to get into that. There are some times where you'll accidentally make a yoked out character. It's just like, oh, all these options sound like fun, and like they make sense. Are you committing to power gaming? No, you're not. You're not committing to power gaming. You picked options that look like fun to you, and they all synergize well.
That's why I said power gaming involves a general bad faith approach to the rules because it goes
Yeah,
beyond just min maxing. It is purposely trying to abuse the rules. This is where like discussions of rules as written versus rules as intended go. Generally speaking, a power gamer does not give two shits about rules as intended unless it benefits them.
yeah,
And that is a very key aspect in how they behave. It is rules as written until rules as intended gives them some kind of benefit, in which case suddenly rules as intended are fine. But if rules as intended hurt them in some way, no, they want rules as written.
and keep in mind that, excuse me, that individuals who are trying to milk the most out of the system, and the majority of the times I see it, it's not even necessarily with anything big. It's not like, oh, this one attribute is higher. That's just part of, min-maxing or trying to make your character like really like, or not even really optimized, but somewhat optimized in what you want them to do. I'm talking about I'm going to use thaumaturgy to give myself a advantage on charisma checks while I talk to this person about a trade deal. Wait, what? What are you doing? It says I get advantage for charisma checks, like
Not in
persuasion
my game.
checks. Yeah, no. That shit can pounce up.
I do want to backtrack for just a second
Sure.
because realize I dropped terminology I don't think we've actually talked about on this show yet. So should probably explain that. Rules as written and rules as intended. Raw versus rye, as in RAW versus RAI. If you're just getting into tabletop games, you may not have seen these yet. If you spend a lot of time in forums or Reddit or whatever that do talk about rules a lot, you may have seen these and been like, what the fuck does that mean? Well, rules as written literally means the rules as they have been written in whatever book, document, whatever you're looking at. Rules as intended is the acknowledgement of they wrote this way, but we either know from an outside source or in how the material is presented that even though they wrote it this way, this wasn't exactly the intention they wanted for it. I can't think of any specific examples offhand, though there are tons if you go looking for them. But there is, especially within GMs who are first starting out as GMs and other just players in general who are first jumping in or coming to learn about these sorts of things. The question often comes up, should I focus on rules as written or rules as intended? And what does rule of cool have to do with all of this? Because there are people who strongly believe in strictly adhering to the rules as written. They do not want to alter any rules within the book or whatever because the rules are written that way for a reason. It's effectively sacrilege to change that. There is the rules as intended crowd who are not necessarily saying we need to change all the rules, but certain rules do not work in the spiritual intent they were designed for. And
N-
so make little adjustments here and there to massage out those problem areas to get the rules to match their actual spiritual intent.
And
And rules
then
cool is to say, in the moment, the rules don't cover this, but this is cool. So for the moment, I say, fuck it, we ball.
so if you want an example of like, oh, what is the intent of the rule versus the rules as written, just look up anything fucking tweeted by Jeremy Crawford, a 5th edition game designer who at multiple times when people go, hey, how does this work? Or what's this supposed to mean? Or we don't quite get this and we're having a disagreement, has generally gone and posted and replied to various tweets and forum posts for intention clarification.
Yeah. Because the reality is, game design is hard. Even simple systems can be complicated in the design aspect. Oftentimes, even something as simple as a write up for a Powered by the Apocalypse hack will have issues and things get missed. And sometimes a rule that they wanted to change never ended up getting changed because they forgot about it. Because the reality is, when you design a game, you go through iterations, you go through steps. You don't go from no game to finished product in one clean, linear line of development. That's not what happens. You sit down and you design aspects of the game, you take notes, you design this system and this system and try to design things so that they will come together in a good way, all this stuff. And you iterate on that, where you will design a mechanic, you'll fiddle with it a bit, you'll go on to design another mechanic and then realize, oh shit, now that other mechanic, not good. That is not going to work with what we've designed up to this point.
Yep.
That needs to get changed. And so you iterate version after version. And that, on top of the scale of whatever system you're working on, it is inevitable. And also just how some things will become ingrained in you with the intent of the system. You won't even consider needing to clarify it because, well, of course you interpret it this way. That's the only way you could. And then you hand it to somebody and they're like, what does this mean? Does this mean I can do the X to the Y? No, why would you think that? That's not our intent. The rules don't say I can't. Shit.
Yeah,
And that's what happens.
that's my favorite reply is the rules don't say that I can't.
Yeah.
To those intentions. It's just like anytime someone says like starts a discussion on what they can and can't do with it doesn't say that I can't.
Yeah.
Typically there's a level of bad faith going on.
Well, and
Now, if
sometimes it is people
something
just asking genuine questions, especially
yeah,
when it's a brand new system. Like, to date this a little bit, Curseborn Kickstarter just ended. That Discord channel has been exploding with questions since it started, especially since we got the rules, with people asking, well, can this do this? The rules don't say it can't, but can it? And needing those clarifications because it is still a draft document. It's not finalized yet.
yeah.
And so some of that is happening, but there are things to watch out for because there are people who do ask in bad faith of it doesn't say I can't do it. So can I do this? Obviously really overpowered thing. Chances are the rules are probably not intended to work that way.
Because one of the reasons why I immediately like my thought is, oh, this is being done in bad faith, is you have those examples of people who go, it says I can imbue a weapon with smite. Does it mean any weapon? It doesn't say I can't imbue a ranged weapon. In which case, that is a good faith. Hey, I need a clarification.
Yeah.
Whereas someone's yeah.
I have a good bad faith one because I see it all the time and it annoys me every time. Can I create water in his lungs?
Yes, that.
No, you can't. It doesn't say I can't. It needs to be in line of sight, but he's in my line of sight. His lungs are not open and exposed to you to see the interior. It's not in line of sight, but the spell doesn't say I can't. It doesn't say you can either. We shouldn't have to have this conversation. That is not the intention here.
Yeah. Another one of those mechanic being used to squeeze every little bit out for power gamers is probably Zemian's favorite 5e cantrip.
Son of a fucking bitch.
Guidance.
I fucking hate this spell so fucking much, dude.
Primarily, based on my understanding, in our lengthy conversations of it, it's usually the clamoring that gets to him, where everyone's clamoring to get that little bit of advantage.
Yeah.
I
mean, the design of it is also bad. It shouldn't exist as a cantrip. But yes, the clamoring it encourages drives me up the wall. Anytime I've ran 5th, I've essentially not allowed guidance. It's a bad spell. If you want to allow it, simple fix. Make it a 1st level spell. See how many people take it then. 1d4 on a cantrip? Stupid. Too strong. Should not exist. But people also use it for literally everything, which is also extremely obnoxious. I'm not going to go in a whole tirade about it, but
not in this episode.
People do. That is a spell people do use just all the time in bad faith. So it is a good example of somebody engaging with the game in bad faith, because I'm sorry, no, you can't cast guidance in the middle of a conversation to improve your odds of negotiation. You're in a high magic setting where people understand magic exists. I don't need to understand what spell you're casting to understand that you are casting magic to fuck with our bartering interaction. I'm kicking you out of my store. Fuck you. You want to make a scene and start slinging magic? I'll call the guards. Because I bet your ass they are trained to deal with uppity casters like your dumbass.
It's a disadvantage to cast a attack spell within 5 feet of a combatant.
Yeah.
Unless you have Warcaster.
As a GM tip for any GMs being like, how do I deal with a uppity caster in my party with a shopkeeper? You don't need them to be a level 20 fighter, okay? They don't need to be that. Like, literally have a short response time for guards. Or honestly, have the shopkeeper have some kind of self-defense weapon or what have you. Either way, the player's getting a fight with a shopkeeper, and if they decide to fight to the death with a shopkeeper, they've essentially banned themselves from whatever location that is. Like, they're going to be wanted for murder, if not robbery. Like, if your players are starting fights in stores, you should have the world respond to that. Not going to go into a whole diatribe about it, but because it came up in this conversation, because it came up in this conversation, just think about that. How would the world respond to this? You have the world actually respond, players will stop doing it.
Yeah, they will. Very, very swiftly. Nothing like rounding up an entire party and throwing them in jail for them to all learn their lesson and then giving them penal labor.
Yes.
Guess what? You decide to fuck around and find out. Guess who's going dungeon delving for free?
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah, you see, there's been this problem in our catacombs. You're going down there, and you're going to bring back us a thing that proves that you did what we told you to do. And if you don't, then you either die down there or you die up here. Have fun.
Oh, better yet, if the country that they're in happens to be in wartime, guess who just got conscripted?
Yeah.
I heard battle wizards are very valuable in the military.
But let's we've stuck on that subject for a minute. Let's talk about how RP should help inform mechanics, and mechanics can be good for informing RP.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a fantastic example for this.
Fire away.
I was playing a Vampire the Masquerade character. I had 2 charisma, which is the average human amount of charisma on my guy. But fuck all in like empathy, expression. Well, I had a little bit in empathy, but shit in expression, leadership, blah, blah, blah. Party member is going through a hard time. Proceed to very awkwardly attempt to help in just a really bad way. Like, he wanted to help, he was trying, but he was, get this, really bad at expressing it. And the rest of the party is watching this dumpster fire of a train wreck happen and are like, afterwards are like, bro, that was awful. It's like, what do you want from me? 2 charisma, no skills to back this up. He is a shut-in nerd for the most part who is trying to comfort somebody going through some shit, and he has no earthly idea how to do it. The world doesn't exactly prepare for you to tell your vampire girlfriend, like, hey, it's going to be okay, even though you can't actually embrace anybody, even though having a kid has been like a sticking point for your character. And now you can't even do that, and you can't even embrace anybody as a vampire because your blood is fucked up. He has no earthly idea how to approach that conversation.
Who would?
Because he had, well, yeah, it's already a tough thing to talk about, but he also doesn't have stats to be like, yeah, okay, I can do this, and go down there and just fix it. No, what did he do? He went down there and was like, how are you doing? And just get stared at and like, can I get something for you? More silence. You want a blood bag?
You look
Get
like
out.
you want a blood bag.
Yeah. Handled it poorly. Do I have to sit there and say, oh, well, he has to be utterly inept in this situation? No. Does it make it more interesting that it's like, yeah, I took consideration in the fact that he doesn't have a lot of ability to handle in this situation, but he does want help. I'm not sidelining myself in the situation because I don't have the stats. I'm not saying, well, I have a bad roll for this, so I'm not going to go help. We didn't even have to roll dice. The mechanics didn't have to play a role in it at all. But I could have also sat there and said, I don't have stats for this, so my character's not going to engage with it. But that's not what the character would really do. The character would go try to help, even though he's utterly inept at it. And I keep the fact that he's inept at it in the back of my mind.
And realistically, if you're like, oh, I want an example of a game that, I both mechanics and RP like reinforce each other, anything White Wolf or Onyx Path.
Yes.
Just realistically, those games lend themselves very well to adding mechanics to what are typically RP decisions, or having you get I don't want to say reward, a roleplay consequence based on what you pick mechanically. Like the fact that you can not be able to embrace anybody, like that was being talked about here.
Yeah, I guess I should clarify. Embrace is a Vampire the Masquerade term for making somebody a vampire.
Yeah.
There's a thing in the setting where it's not super common, but there are some women who become vampires, some men too, actually. But there are people who become vampires that in life they wanted to have kids and struggle to come with terms with the fact that they can't do that anymore as a vampire. And so they use the embrace as an alternative to that. sometimes to an unhealthy degree, see the child flaw.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess I should have explained that when I gave that example. But yeah, like you said, White Wolf games and Onyx Path games historically have been very good at giving you mechanics that also double as really good roleplay fodder and roleplay hooks and stuff. They're also good at giving mechanics in their systems that will inform your roleplay. For example, in Werewolf, you have a rage mechanic. It's built into your character. Every character has to deal with it. It's not a choice. Every character has this on their sheet. What type of auspice you are as a guru determines how much rage you have. Oh no, it's not your auspice, it's your breed. Your breed determines how much rage you have.
I'm about to say you're gonna have to start defining.
Yeah. If essentially, if you're born as a wolf, you have more rage. Born as a human, you have less rage. Simple as. You have more to be mad about if you were born as a wolf.
One day we'll play a White Wolf game on the podcast.
We will. I promise.
I promise.
Either I running it or I guilt somebody into running it.
It'd probably be me, and I have no problem running it. It's just I'd probably end up making you guys play Werewolf.
That's fine. But rage as a mechanic says, one of the many things it does is it says, hey, regular people are uncomfortable around you, the bigger this value is. So the higher your rage is, the more uncomfortable people are around you. At rage 3, you can hold down a job, but if it's like a customer service job, you're probably not going to last long in that job.
Make a good bouncer.
Oh, that's a good example. That's how you can manage that. But when you get to say rage 5, you flat out can't hold out. You can't really hold down a job, period. Unless it is a job that you get paid to go out and be by yourself 99% of the time. That's the only time you're really going to be able to hold down that job. Because rage says, no, people literally get uncomfortable around you. Because they can tell there is something innately predatory about you, and it is deeply disconcerting. They do not feel safe around you. And it shades how you interact with the setting so much. Because just existing in a city is now a constant reminder that you're not normal. People at Rage 5, people will start crossing the street to avoid walking past you. So these are examples of mechanics and force and roleplay. Because that's going to shade how you perceive the world around you. Vampire does the same thing with the blood pool. It shades how you look at mortals, how you look at humans. Which, I mean, I just did it. I didn't even call them human first. I called them mortal. Because when you play vampire, you become jaded against human people. They're not humans anymore. They are tools, and they are more so food. Your blood pool starts getting low. You start looking at them as food. Can I get this one off by themselves? What if I get this one to do things for me? I'm starting to get a little hungry. I'm a little peckish. I should probably top off. This is a good opportunity. But you also have, for Onyx Path, you have Aberrant. Aberrant has a mechanic that is really good for enforcing roleplay and how your character grows. In that you have to max out your powers. You have to push beyond your limits in order to grow your power set. If you want to learn how to heal people, you have to actually push your abilities beyond their limits, where you temporarily gain the ability to heal, and then through time spent training, you can permanently unlock that.
And another thing to help with like RP informing mechanics, mechanics informing RP is back to my earliest information of like, oh, I want to make a ranger, so I need to have them be good at range combat. So, good dex, they have a bow, all that. Okay, what put you down this line? You get to start making decisions. It's like to back up your mechanical choices of I'm an archer, I'm a ranger. Why? Well, I left the army because they did something horrific, or I wasn't going along with something that they were doing, or I'm a deserter. These are all things that you can build upon and start adding more and more blocks to until you have a good cohesive like backstory, and you inform yourself about your character. So let's say archer, you left the army and went off into the wilds, so you had to learn how to fend for yourself, which is why you're a ranger, not a fighter. And you're a deserter, so you have to constantly be hiding from the law if you do go out into a major town or city, because deserters aren't treated kindly. You have to keep that tucked away. So your character is likely aloof, more in touch with nature than people, and secretive. Great. You've just right then and there, through all those decisions, you have the bare bones of a character, both RP wise, and you've now informed other parts of your thing. You're now like, oh, I should probably get survival because he had to survive in the woods by himself. Oh, I have to hide and like lie, so like stealth or deception. So these things can sit there, they can feed off each other and let you build more and more and more and make a really good character. You don't have to just like, oh, well, I'm going to be John Valouche, the archer extraordinaire with a silver tongue and golden eyes that can see a mosquito fart 500 miles away. You don't need to do that. That's not.
He's him.
It is him, John Valouche. Sounds like a fucking Nicolas Cage character. I'll do anything for money. And could you still like make that concept interesting? Yeah, but you have a ranger who like why? Okay, so why do they have a silver tongue? Like you have to justify RP wise a number of your mechanical decisions. Or, if you say they have a silver tongue and they have nothing in charisma and nothing in persuasion, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Another way RP can inform mechanics is you can. So, for example, when I was making a character for a Pathfinder game, I mentioned this in our Pathfinder review. We were playing in the Forgotten Realms, like on the Sword Coast or whatever. I knew nothing about that setting. I find the official D&D setting not good. Let's put it that way.
Which official setting?
I mean, Forgotten Realms.
Okay.
Faerun, etc.
I was just saying that technically speaking, they have like 3. It's like
there are some that I am kind of interested in, like Barovia, for example, or Ravenloft in general, etc. Like, interesting. I like these. They have a concise idea, etc., etc. There are a few that I do find interesting, but the main line, this is kind of where everything gets shoved in. Bleh. So I was like, hey, I don't know shit about this setting. I don't want to do a ton of homework for the setting. I'd rather just learn naturally through playing the game. So I decided to start making a character who had a reason for not knowing a lot of stuff. And I wasn't going to go amnesia route or anything like that. Just they have very little worldly experience. So I decided, I found out about some of the areas I could be from. Found out one of them had slavery. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And made a character. We were using traits and drawbacks. So I was looking through traits and drawbacks, trying to decide what I wanted to take. Came across the drawback, mark of slavery. Sorry, excuse me. Mark of slavery, which is what gave me the idea of like that's perfect. I could be a slave. So there's mechanics informing roleplay, because that was a mechanical option that gave me a roleplay idea. But then I sit there and it's like, okay, so I'm going to do this. I ended up taking traits that gave me the ability to have swim and climb as class skills. I decided he was going to be a pearl diver, so he spends a lot of time swimming, diving, climbing back up on the ship. Pretty straightforward. And so I had made essentially an RP decision of I wanted to make somebody who was going to be very uneducated about the greater world, which then informed mechanical decisions to be made. And those mechanical decisions later informed roleplay decisions because it colored a lot about how he interacted with the world. He had a very strong line and stance on a lot of different things. Like he would take death before ever being captured, essentially. He would not willingly go in shackles ever again. And so these things are role-playing mechanics can be separate, but also can be deeply intertwined. You don't have to treat them as separate, but you have to acknowledge, like, just because somebody is heavy mechanic leaning does not mean they can't role play.
There's also the aspect of not just like during character creation, but also like character growth. Is, in my personal opinion, what happens in RP should inform your character on what they need to be increasing.
Yeah.
For example, with Tilk with Pathfinder, one of the things I started putting points into for Tilk was, oh god, I have to start learning how to deal with the nobility. Oh god, I have to know how nobility works. I fucking escaped this at one point. I have nothing in it. Well, guess I need to start building that back up. So I started putting points in my few skill points that I had into knowledge nobility.
Yeah.
Because for those of you who don't know, paladins, if you don't have an insight intelligence bonus, you get like 2 experience points for 2 skill points. It's rough out there for a dum-dum.
Yeah. And I will say, as much as I love roleplay influencing character growth decisions, there are some systems that do not lend themselves very well to this approach. I will say, D&D 5th, as an example, you're kind of locked in, bud.
Yeah.
Like, there is very little opportunity to change up what you're doing outside of picking up an extra class if your GM allows it.
Yep.
And you're
optional.
limited in what that extra class can be. Like, you have to have the attribute requirements, which you really shouldn't go into a class you don't have the attributes for anyways, but you do have a requirement in your stats, a minimum requirement to get into another class. But even then, like, if you're a barbarian and you've built solidly for barbarian, chances are you're not going to pick up levels of wizard at all. And if you just wanted to be just a bit more learned, you have very little opportunity to increase your intelligence or to increase your skill checks for like knowledge type things. You're pretty locked into what you are, whereas some games, using once again World of Darkness as an example, it might be a little bit more expensive XP wise to adjust into another area your character previously wasn't good at. Like, if you want to go from being very poor at something, like my character who had poor social skills, if I suddenly wanted to be like, actually, I want social stats and skills and stuff, I could do that. It would take time, but that's not an impossible thing for me to do. that character actually started out pretty much useless in combat. He had a dot of brawl at the start of that game. No combat disciplines. No dots in melee, no dots in firearms. And then by the end of the game, he had Protean 2, Celerity 3, Potence 2, was working on Fortitude, and he had 4 dots in Brawl, 3 dots in Firearms, 2 dots in Melee. Like, he wasn't the strongest fighter in that game, but you did not want to start shit with him either. I know a lot of those terms may not mean anything to somebody, but he went from gets his ass kicked to kick ass. Took a lot of XP to get there, but I could do it.
And there are a number of systems that, don't lend themselves necessarily to character growth. My first thought is, honestly, a lot of things powered by the apocalypse, because if I understand correctly, a lot of the time you make adjustments. You don't necessarily grow. There are very few powered by the apocalypse games, like Blades in the Dark, that do have growth attached to it. From my understanding, I could be incorrect. I'd be willing to be incorrect. I don't pay a lot of attention to those games, so gabagool.
Well, most of those games, while they can be run long term, are not really designed for long term play. So generally, there's not a lot of need for a progression system. You just kind of move the numbers around.
Another one that comes to my mind is the FFG Star Wars games.
Yeah.
Because you're stuck to trees for those. So even if you do go, well, I have the ability to go into another tree, that tree still has its own limitations.
Yep.
So, like, you can grow and make decisions based off that, but it's good to understand that, some games won't let you mechanically grow from RP. And I'll admit, for the most part, I'm not interested in those games.
Rules is written in the FFG Star Wars games. You can't raise your attributes, your characteristics. So, like your strength score or brawn, sorry. You can't increase that outside of character creation. Which is, you mean to tell me I can bench press 1,000,000 pounds every day, 8 hours a day, and my brawn would never increase? It's kind of whack, bro.
It's kind of whack, bro.
I know that was a little hyperbolic of an example, but gets the point across. I can do nothing to increase my brawn other than cybernetic enhancement. It's kind of dumb.
And like I said, a number of those games that have those limitations, I'm not a big fan of. I have tried multiple times to run the FFG Star Wars games, and this was before I had a hate boner for FFG. You heard me. I just couldn't get into running the Star Wars games. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And part of it was how the game functions, how the dice play out. But it's tough to have players go up to you and go, "Can I do this?" And you have to either make something up to allow them to do the thing, or just tell them, "No, sorry, it's not in the rules," which sucks. Because it's like, "Oh, I want to be here and I want to be here. I want to do this and I want to also do this." It felt too restraining at times. And then they had their weird ass dice system that I'm not the biggest fan of. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with numbers. I don't know why.
It might be a complaint with the dice system. It's just deciphering the dice is just too much work. It slows the game down too much.
Do you want to
have to play with a cheat sheet to decipher what you're going to spend your results on? It's irritating.
You want to be a medieval sage or a Greek diviner? You want to read the bones? You want to scatter the bones across the bowl and decipher them? That's playing most FFG tabletop games.
Yeah. I play a caster in Damiani's off-pod Genesis game that he is running. Beforehand, I had a pretty neutral to positive feeling about Genesis. But after being on the player side, some more, engaging with more of the systems and such. Because before this, my only experience was playing in the Star Wars games, where I played a pretty straightforward mechanically character. Playing a mad character now, fucking sick of it. I hate it. Like, I'm not dropping the game over it, but I don't want to play Genesis again. Just no.
Weird West.
Yeah, that's it. Playing Star Wars, playing the very mechanically focused character, but I had fun role play with that character. It was very mechanically simple because I was just dual wield pistols, blast. Oh, I have advantage. I shoot again, and that was it. That was the character in combat.
Yeah.
I was really just combat junkie. Agility 5, blasters light 5. I shoot. Oh, I have advantage. I shoot again.
Pew, pew.
That was pretty much it.
But all that aside, our wild tangent besides.
Yes.
Let's talk about bad mechanics does not make a character interesting, just less helpful. We've kind of already covered parts of this.
This is technically part of the Stormwind Fallacy, because this point comes up a lot when other arguments regarding the Stormwind Fallacy come up. But some people bring it up in vacuum, and it's gimping your character does not inherently make them better role played. Making a character who is shit at something, it doesn't make them more interesting. It just doesn't. Oh, look, my wizard's so quirky. He has a negative to his casting stat. You're not quirky, you're a failure. Why are you in the party?
You were kicked out of Wizard College and sent straight to Clown College.
Yeah. This does not help the group. This is not interesting. If you want to play a character who is quote-unquote bad at whatever their thing is because you want to roleplay them getting good at that thing, especially in the context of D&D where you don't really actually have a lot of mechanical room to explore that without literally gimping your character for the rest of the game. Because think about it. Nothing's stopping you in the rules for being intelligence 10 in D&D 5e as a wizard at level 1. I don't believe there's a rule that requires you to have, at minimum, 13 intelligence.
Only if you multi-class.
Only if you multi-class. So in order to actually get to +5 bonus in your intelligence, that is to be intelligence 20, you will be level 20 when you finally get there.
If your game goes on.
Whereas you could easily be there as early as level 4 if you actually just built the character correctly. Or, more than likely, being conservative, level 8.
Which is a healthy amount of time for your character to go from being, oh, I'm not sure or confident in this, to, hey, I'm pretty good at this.
Well,
and then you
the
get
thing is...
And then you get to do an entirely different role-playing arc. Now you get to be well, now I'm hot shit.
Your roleplay at being bad at something does not need to be constrained by the mechanics. Because you could roleplay it as you just think you're bad at it. But when you succeed, you actually do well. You can sit there and you can portray a character who lacks confidence, and because of that, they seem bad at it. For example, using our wizard who we want to portray as bad at magic. You could flavor this roleplay-wise by, instead of them just whipping out the magic and I cast color spray, be like, they start rifling through their material pouches. They pull something out, like, oh no, that's a different spell. And then they're reaching through their pouches, and they finally get the right stuff. And then what was the words? Right. Color spray. Oh, that sounds so lame. And then the effect goes off or whatever. That gives the impression of, oh shit, they're not really good at this.
Yeah.
They're pretty new to this. Or when they do fail at something, lean into it and have them like start beating themselves up. Why did I try to do that? That was so stupid. That was never gonna fucking work. There are ways to roleplay. You can portray a character who is struggling, is bad, or is simply lacking confidence or not believing in their ability, despite the fact that they have mechanics that say, no, they're actually good at this. It's just all in how you roleplay it.
And the matter of fact is the mechanics are here that way when dice hit table, decisions can be made using the dice. And that can then push story and RP along for what is going on. You hampering yourself to attempt to make that latter part more, quote unquote, interesting doesn't really change whether or not you're good at roleplay. If you're not good at, describing what you're doing or being creative on the spot, you making a character that's mechanically bad in some hope that that will fix the other problem is just creating two problems. Hence the discussion of the Stormwind Fallacy. You're just less helpful.
Yep. Which, using D&D still as an example, because it's the common touchstone. We're talking about a group of adventurers who may or may not be going out to save the world, or even if they're just dungeon delving. Let me ask you this. You're doing things that involve putting your life on the line. Your life is actively in danger. Who would you rather have at your side? The wizard with 10 intelligence, or the wizard with, we'll be generous and say, 17 intelligence, which is easily attainable in character creation, or even just 15 intelligence? Which would you rather have?
But
Somebody
Jack,
who is utterly inept and is a liability, because they're going to end up getting either themselves killed or somebody else killed because they are incapable? Or are you going to take somebody who can carry their own weight?
But Jack, what we don't get to see each other's stats, so I don't know who has 10 intelligence, so it doesn't matter because I can't see what their numbers are.
No, but if I am regularly seeing your effects going poorly, my character can say, yeah, no, you're out of the group. You're a danger. You are more of a risk to this entire group than you are a help. Because here's the thing. If you roleplay a character who is inept, but then their effects actually work, the group is enabled in roleplay to be like, hey, bud, when you do the thing, you're actually kind of good at it. I think your issue is a confidence problem, or maybe you just need to practice some more, or whatever. Like, the group isn't seeing you constantly fucking failing because you actually have the stats to support it. And I get it. Most roleplay groups are not going to be hostile to your character because they have bad stats. Because people don't want to say, no, your character sucks, make a new character. But you shouldn't be taking advantage of people's kindness to play a shitty character that is just going to be dead weight. And also, if you are going to play a long-term campaign, is it really going to be fun to be playing that character that is mechanically deficient levels 1 to 20? Like, to me, that sounds awful
Yeah.
because the system does not support you in that way. You will forever be behind until you hit level 20. You don't want to wait till level 20 to have a +5. You want to have a +5, hopefully, before you're halfway through 120, if you even get that far. Because chances are, the average game that starts at level 1 and actually goes for a long time will probably peter out around level 6 or level 7. Most people don't play beyond that. Most people, the majority of their experience is spent between levels 1 and 5. That's just how it is. So do you really want to spend that time playing a character that is non-functional?
And I think like we've talked about like mechanics, bad mechanics doesn't make good game, good role play. So is there any final advice you'd want to give to folks that, want to understand mechanically why how to build a character?
You don't. So first step is obviously read the rules. At least read the rules that are important to your character. Understand how it works, why it works. Don't just understand, well, my intelligence is high, so I have a higher save DC. Understand why that is. Like, oh, well, my save DC is calculated by adding 8 plus my intelligence modifier plus the spell level. So therefore, I should have a higher intelligence. Like, actually understand. Like, if you're just starting out, you don't need to understand every single rule in its complete depth, but you should be striving to understand the rules at some point. Nobody likes to have to continuously re explain basic rules to somebody. But also, I don't want anybody to walk away from this episode thinking that they have to min max. Like, I encourage people to get as much as they can out of their characters, to be the badasses that they want to be, to fulfill that power fantasy they want to have for their character and for their play experience. But you do not need to min max to build a mechanically sufficient character. You don't have to. So if you're going to walk away from this episode thinking that, no, you're not hearing what we're saying. You don't need to min-max. We're just saying min-maxing isn't the bad evil thing some people make it out to be. You just have to understand the mechanics and utilize them to make a good character. Or at least, if you don't understand the mechanics, go to a friend who actually knows something about the game, or go online or whatever and say, hey, I'm making a wizard. What does my wizard need to be a good wizard? And people are generally pretty friendly and will tell you. Some people will give you like a build. It's up to you if you want to follow that build. You do not need to pick the most optimal choices. Sure, some people might say, hey, Blade Singer is much better than Eldritch Knight, so if you want to be a fighty caster, go Blade Singer over Eldritch Knight. If you want more of the fighter flavor, there's nothing wrong with going Eldritch Knight. It's whatever. You don't have to pick the absolute best option. You can pick options for flavor. It's not gimping yourself to pick something that is not optimal or not meta. But it is gimping yourself to literally cripple the roles that you need for your character to do the thing. Which, if your DM is just like, you're just going to roll your stats top to bottom and what you get is what you get, and you have, I don't know, -5 intelligence, and then you pick wizard, why? Or if they make you pick your class before you roll your stats, ask them why.
Why?
Why
Why
are
have
they
you done
like
this to
this?
me?
Who hurt them?
Who hurt? Exactly.
So that's my big takeaway. Mechanics do not need to be a scary thing. You do not need to be a min-maxer to make a character who's going to function reasonably well, and you're not cool for gimping your character. Just, it's a game. Engage with the game aspect of the game. You don't need to be the master of the system or whatever to be able to do these things.
No. And like, for me, final advice is, pick a character concept that you're gonna have fun with. Pick mechanics that you're gonna enjoy playing. I typically don't play a caster because I find messing with the magic mechanics of systems to be slightly annoying. Like, there are notable exceptions to that. There are some that I just haven't really tried it out on, like Shadowrun.
Yeah.
If I did Shadowrun, I'd probably enjoy it. There's just so much to Shadowrun that I'm like, I don't know if I want to go about doing all that. I know how to play my rigor. I'll stick to that.
Yeah.
Combat's relatively simple.
I do actually, I recalled something I thought about before we started recording that I did just remember.
Okay.
There are some people who are of the mind that it is fun or quirky to give their character a disability.
Mm.
I will say this. This topic is very fraught. People have variable opinions on this. If you are going to give your character a disability, discuss with the group. What does that mean for your game? Communicate intention and reason clearly, and what exactly you want out of that experience. Because there are people that have variable opinions about that sort of thing. Some people are of the mind, hand wavium, you have it, but it is not a major problem for the game. Some people are of the mind, if you're going to have a disability, it should matter. And there are both disabled and non-disabled individuals on both sides of this. And I understand some people have mixed feelings about the term disabled. I'm not using it as a pejorative or anything. Like, we're all good-natured lefties here. Same team.
Yeah.
So, but seriously, have that conversation. I will say from personal experience, it can detract when it's not carefully considered. When I was still figuring out some of my ST stuff, I had a player, they know who they are. They know, in hindsight, probably wasn't the best idea. They played a character who's a mute. They could not speak because of an injury that character had sustained in life. They obviously they can make noises, but actually speaking was genuinely difficult for them. It was essentially impossible. So they had to communicate through sign language. Problem was, not everybody in the party could speak sign language, which meant a player character had to translate for them constantly, and it became annoying for that player to constantly dictate that they were doing that, and that it was a constant issue because it came up a lot. And part of it was my fault for not handling expectations for how it was going to work. Part of it was it wasn't a group discussion, and it wasn't brought up like immediately as soon as it started feeling like it was a problem. So I only bring it up because it's tangentially related to this, because it is a common thing that comes up, and it's not necessarily just physical disabilities. There are also cases where people think it is cool or quirky to, I don't know, give various mental conditions to their characters, even when they know next to nothing about those conditions. I think we all know, those of us who are at least are familiar with various fan fiction and online role playing groups, that it is not all too uncommon to encounter people who think it's fun and quirky to have a quote unquote allegedly schizophrenic character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I don't miss those cringy teenage years of other teenagers doing these things.
and there's something to be said that some games, have this as mechanics. For example, any
Yeah.
psychological horror game or game that has horror in it will have uh various psychological conditions in them. Any of the Call of Cthulhu games, despite its distraught source material that it
Yeah.
came from, Eclipse Phase
And
also has this. Yeah, Eclipse Phase also has this, but a number of these address this like, hey, this is what this is meant to represent. Where an individual has experienced something so traumatic, they're no longer like reality is shifted for them, is what it's supposed to be. Like reality no longer functions as they believe it to be because they usually seen something such as a horror beyond space and time that popped itself out of a corner, chewed a guy's face off, and then went back through the corner, never to be seen again.
yeah.
So it's understand that when a game does this, it's not trying to comment on these issues. Some games, like Eclipse Phase, has entire sections going over, hey, here's why this is here. And this is what we mean by it.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely understand when you're opening a system, do keep in mind some of these systems also came out of other times. So some of these systems that do have mechanics for these things do not necessarily have modern sensibilities or even correct verbiage.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of discussion surrounding World of Darkness games for the term derangements, referring to mental conditions. There are people who strongly dislike. There are people who have mixed feelings. There are people who are, it's fine, which I'm not going to dictate on that. I do feel like there's better terminology that could have been used. But at the same time, a lot of these games were designed in the 90s. Should they have updated these terminologies with 20th anniversary editions? Yeah, probably. But some of these editions also, I mean, still came out years ago at this point. So these, the important takeaway is talk to your group, make sure everybody's on the same page. As long as everybody is signing up for the same experience, everything should be fine. Obviously, you know, do what you should to be respectful or whatever, but it's important to know that there is ultimately no right way to play games. There is no one true way for expressing, be it mental conditions, physical conditions, whatever, when it comes to tabletop games. There are some people who are very okay with having magical wheelchair that is capable of keeping up with everybody and has no issues. It doesn't require mechanics or whatever. It literally just makes it so the player character can do everything the rest of the party does. And it's hand waving them. Doesn't give them any special advantages or anything. They're just as good as the other players. And for some groups, that's fine. Some groups, that breaks their immersion. Just figure out where your group lands on that. And, if you're going to stream it or record it and put it out there, Make it clear, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we agreed on, and then just don't be disrespectful about it. Just acknowledge it for what it is and move on. There's a podcast I listen to from time to time where they do a myriad of games. And for example, they have a Victorian era mage game. Dork Tales is the name of the podcast. They openly say at the beginning of their episodes, there's going to be sexism in this game. The players have opted into that. That is not in support. Like, none of us on this podcast support these views of sexism, but the players have opted in for that accuracy of the time. So, this is kind of part of one of the things to be talking about session 0, especially if you're a player who wants to play somebody who has some kind of disability, who may be blind, wheelchair bound, whatever. Talk to your GM, talk to the players, set expectations, and keep in mind, if you say I want to play a blind character, your GM also has the right to be like, I don't want to deal with that. Like, unless you're an actual blind person asking for that, that's probably going to be a different conversation.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to say no, because that's understandable. You have a disability in real life and you feel like it makes you feel closer to the character. I have a hard time seeing any rational GM being like, no. But if you don't have this condition, whatever it may be, GM has a right to say, nah, I don't think that's really going to add a lot to the game, or at least I'm not interested in exploring that. And you got to be willing to accept that some people don't opt into whatever that story is, or are not necessarily comfortable with telling that story, especially if you're not somebody who has that lived experience. So, make considerations, communicate. Every episode we have to say it. Communicate. Have these conversations. Do not decide in a vacuum, this is what I'm doing. Don't tell anybody and show up session 1 and that's what you're playing. Because not everybody wants to sign up to have to necessarily, depending, because, if you don't talk about it, the ST may decide, no, we're going to go hardcore realistic with this. And then the rest of the party is like, but I don't want to have to deal with this. Like, if this is how the ST is going to run it, or the GM is going to run it, I don't want to deal with it this way. I don't want to have to put up with this. But you've made the decision for the group. So communicate.
Yeah.
Because that is a way people try to do something to the character to make them more interesting and unique. Which is, only do it if it actually, like, there's character reason for it, and it's interesting in some way, like actually like built into your backstory, and it's not just an arbitrary decision that you think is going to make them more interesting just by it being there. I think you know what I'm saying here. Like,
yeah,
I don't need to beat this 10 different ways. Just,
no.
Yeah. I don't see it a lot. I don't see it as much as I used to. But it's tangentially related to this conversation. I thought it was a good thing to bring up.
No, I think it is a good thing to bring up.
Yeah, because I can't imagine this being an entire episode on its own for this kind of stuff. So just talk about it. Do not just make the decision for the group.
That's a big no-no, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that about does it.
Yeah, I think we did the thing.
We did the thing. I want to thank everybody for listening and enjoying our discussion as we talk about, we've gone over both the role-playing aspect and the mechanical aspect of making a character. join us next time as we talk about something else. I don't think we figured out what we're doing next for player portfolio yet.
No, I don't think so. But we have a while before the next player profile
We do.
portfolio, so we'll figure it out at some point. But I, you know, we've talked about, what we could talk about? Making connections with other party members for the start of the game.
We could do that. I
Yeah,
think that'd be a good thing to do.
because I think there's some awesome tools out there for doing that. I think there's some interesting conversation we can have there.
Absolutely. This is where we absolutely shill Decima.
We will actually review it at some point,
We will
but
one day.
it's absolutely a tool that can be used, and we will talk about it.
But thank you again for listening and hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye bye.